Right, good morning. Thank you, Mark. Firstly, just some introductions. My name is Brian Montgomery, and I would like to add my welcome to you coming along this morning. Also, my thanks for your interest in this very important topic. A little bit about my background. I was asked to co-chair this because of my clinical background. I was formerly a general practitioner for 15 years, but have actually gone into a number of senior management roles within the NHS since then, including Trust Medical Director in Lothian and Board Medical Director in Fife, and laterally as well as Interim Chief Executive in Fife. For the last 4 years, though, I've stepped aside from any NHS role and have been doing consultancy work, and it's one of the reasons I've been asked to come back and co-chair the review with Dr. Fraser.
Thanks, Brian. Good morning, and likewise I'd like to add my welcome to you all. I'm Andrew Fraser, Director of Public Health Science at NHS Health Scotland. I've been there for about 6.5 years, and I've previously held positions in NHS Highland, the government. I left there in 2003, and with the Scottish Prison Service before coming to my current post. So that's what brings me to the review. And I think in Précis, Brian and I want to bring our clinical and management experience to the task at hand. Now, what is that? The Queen Elizabeth University Independent Review, in Queen Elizabeth Hospital, University Hospital Independent Review. I better get that right. It is a review concerning infection control. It's quite a specific remit. We are aware that we have a hospital. It's a huge hospital which was built and opened in 2015. It does many things. There have been many press and public accounts of some of the activities in the hospital, but we are focusing on the specific area of infection control in our remit. So a bit about the background to where this issue focuses. We've been asked to review infection control, or address concerns about patient safety at the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital and the Royal Hospital for Children, adjacent to the larger hospital. Since opening in 2015, it has experienced some problems with rare microorganisms. A small number of patients have contracted severe infections caused by rare organisms, and a number of rare microbiological contaminants have occurred in some of the systems with a potential to cause serious infections, and they've already also been identified on the way through both the commissioning and the early running of the building, or the building complex. So that's the background. The contamination issues affect the water systems, that's both the water supply and drainage, and also the air ventilation systems, and we'll examine both the general ventilation systems, but also the special ventilation systems for special areas of the hospital. So that will be within the focus of our work. These concerns about patient safety, well, there are questions about the findings we've been asked to focus on, the links to patient illness, the risk of future contaminants and illness will be within our focus. The accounts which have raised public concern, raised public representative concern, professional and media concern. So these will be within the remit. Brian.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. So just the formal remit is as shown on the slide up there, and I think I would like to stress to you that despite the fairly wide-ranging title, the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital Independent Review, the remit is very much focused on the infection control issues. This is the remit that we were asked to pick up. We are happy to do so, and we will work to it. So we're looking at the design, build, commissioning and maintenance of both the Queen Elizabeth Hospital and also the Royal Hospital for Children, and particularly whether any of these issues have had an adverse impact on the risk of healthcare associated infection, and also going forward, whether there's any learning for the NHS, particularly when we embark on the next project to build a hospital or healthcare premises, are the things that we can learn from this experience. I think it's important also at this stage to make the point that this is but one of several reviews or inspections that are ongoing at the wider site, and that's the reason we are concentrating solely on the infection control. We believe there are other processes already in train looking at some of the other concerns that have been raised since the opening of the hospital. The scope of the review is well defined: infection prevention and control. And it's looking at the two new buildings, the Queen Elizabeth and the Royal Hospital for Children. It's looking at aspects to do with the design of those buildings, how they were built, the commissioning process by which they were handed over, and the maintenance in terms of how they're being looked after on an ongoing basis. We're also interested in what we've called the governance behind this. The governance is about, if you like, the decision making. It's how decisions are being reached in terms of what will be put in place, how it will be used, things like that. So it's not purely the bricks and mortar. It's also some of the processes that have supported the delivery of the hospital. We're particularly interested, as Andrew has said, in the safety of systems associated with water, drainage and ventilation because of the experience that there has been in terms of isolating unusual and rare microorganisms. There's also an issue, clearly, when one is building a hospital of this size and complexity, there are a whole number of issues that have to be borne in mind around legislation, standards, recommendations and guidance. And we want to look at ensuring that these have been taken full account of and where necessary complied with. Changes to the specification are also of interest to us. So in other words, following the original design, the original process, where things changed along the way that have had unintended consequences, particularly with regard to the risk of infection and infection control. And then finally, as part of our scope, it's about how the hospitals are being used. Is this as originally envisaged, or has the use been changed for any reason? And if so, has that change had any impact in relation to infection control? I think it's also important to be clear what we're not looking at, what is out of scope for the review. So we're not looking at what's being termed the retained estate. So in other words, that's the buildings that were already on the site that are still being used prior to the opening of the Queen Elizabeth and the Royal Children's Hospital. It's also important to understand that we're not looking at the clinical management of individual patients or specific groups of patients. We're looking at the environment in which these patients have been managed, but there are other processes for reviewing the care afforded to individual patients. We're not looking at aspects of design, build, commissioning and maintenance which have no impact or direct impact on infection prevention and control. And already we've been asked questions about whether we'll be looking at issues, for example, to do with things like the problems that have been with cladding, glazing, etc. These fall out with the scope of our remit and the view that we're undertaking. And as I say, there are a number of other processes in train already, and if we feel that there are things that are being dealt with or have been dealt with elsewhere, it's not that we will ignore them, but we will not duplicate or replicate work that has already been done. Andrew, do you want to talk a bit about the approach?
Yeah. Really, on this slide, we've described the journey we've been on so far, where we've reached, and to begin to ask you two things, really. The first thing is our approach really has been initially to establish the review so that we can conduct it thoroughly and with the support of a team, and we're assembling that team still. So they are being appointed as I speak. Mark is our deputy head, and we're very pleased that he's joined us. He's got extensive background experience with setting up reviews. We're selecting key advisors in the area of infection control, microbiology, and I'm particularly pleased that Professor Billy Hare has joined us on the construction design and building side, and Billy's with us in the front row here. He is the Professor of Construction Management and Deputy Director of the Beam Research Centre at Glasgow Caledonian University, and he's been a great help to us in guiding us even at the early stages, and I'm sure we will have a lot to say with each other over the ensuing months. So where have we reached at the moment? We're gathering information, including key documentation. That's the stage we've reached, and one of the objectives of today is to start to invite people to contribute to that. The other key objective is to put out our preliminary remit, which Brian has talked through. We're inviting feedback on that remit. It isn't the last word, but we would like people to comment on it to see if it adequately captures what they have in mind for this review, accepting that we have been asked to look in a specific area. We are open to all sorts of representations around that area, but we'd like to put out there our proposal for feedback over the next few weeks. So these are the two key tasks: to start to invite contributions and information on within our remit, and also to invite feedback on it. And then the next slide shows what we would like to specify in terms, in addition to written communications from the management side, and we're already in touch with the government and the private contractors and with Greater Glasgow and Clyde NHS Board about sourcing relevant information. But we have here listed the groups of people we would like to speak to, or like to speak to us on the way through. Patients and families with experience of care in this area, stakeholders with involvement and experience of the design, build, commissioning and maintenance, staff. We've already been in touch with a number of groups of staff, some of them listed there, but that's not an exhaustive list. External stakeholders, such as members of the wider public and their representatives, and individuals or groups with concerns relating to the built environment, to fill out the picture that we're trying to create and the narrative. So the last point, though, about the connection between the built environment and its impact on infection prevention and control, we have an open mind about how these links occur and how possible links may relate to disease and illness in this case and in the future. So we will keep an open mind on representations of that sort. And the next slide is really assimilating that information gathering. So we'll receive communications, we'll familiarise ourselves with the documentation, and we expect quite a bit of it. We'll go through all that and construct a chain of events and surface the issues of key focus. We'll then turn to ask to interview people. This is not a statutory inquiry, it's a non-statutory inquiry. We can't require people to speak to us, but we'll invite people to speak with us at the stage after we have received written communications. And we'll complete that process by amending interviews and seeking to confirm what we've heard and firm up the information we've received. We then go on to the reporting stage, findings, recommendations. If we have key and urgent matters which occur on the way through, we have committed to our key stakeholders that we've met already, the Glasgow Health Board and the government, that we will communicate these and similarly we'll make them known more widely. Then we'll move on to findings of greater detail and recommendations, preparing and submitting a final report in due course. Thank you.
Okay, to summarise then, I guess, without wishing to oversimplify it, the question that we are seeking to answer is the built environment of the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital and the Royal Hospital for Children making it difficult for staff to deliver optimal practice in infection prevention and control? That is really the crux of the review. And this is where we need your help. We need you to tell us your experiences, your views in terms of where we stand in relation to those issues. And I guess, as Andrew said, we would like some feedback on our terms of reference and our remit. Basically, we'd like your advice, your views on whether we're actually looking at the right things, are we asking the right questions, and are we giving the right people the opportunity to contribute, so that when we have our report in due course, it is meaningful, recognisable and valuable, and will actually make a difference going forward, say that when we embark on the next project of a significant hospital build or healthcare premises build in the NHS in Scotland. In terms of getting in touch with us, there are a number of routes in that we'd be delighted for you to use. There is a dedicated email address. We have a PO box number. In 15 minutes' time, we will have a website that will be live. So this is launched today. I'm told it goes live at 11 o'clock. And again, you will be able to get details of the background to the review, the progress of the review, but also the ability to contact us through the website as well. So that we hope will be a good repository of information, both in terms of where we're coming from, but also where the review is going to. And we're also going onto Twitter in terms of providing updates on that basis as well.